Borada and welcome to the InstaSim channel. In this episode I'm going to be going over the recording process for gaming videos. Welcome back to Making YouTube Videos. It's a series where I kind of go over the process that I go through for making YouTube videos, or how I make my own YouTube videos here on the platform. I mean, it's also slightly a bit of a tutorial series as well for people who want to kind of go ahead and do it and just, know from the things that I do, or if you want some ideas on how to go about doing it yourself. This is actually the second video in the series, and in this one I'm going to be going over the recording process for gaming videos. Again, please be aware that this is a specific one about gaming videos. It'll be specifically about gaming, and I'll be making a lot of references to that in the video. But I would say that if you wanted to make things like commentary style videos or tutorials where you want to be capturing your desktop or something, then this can also be adapted to those kinds of content as well. I will have another video out as well on the vlogs. If it's not already out, then it will be out very soon, and that will go over the recording of vlogs and how I do that myself. If you have any specific use cases which I've not mentioned already, then please feel free to let me know down in the comments, and I'll try and see how you can either adapt this video to your specific type of content, or maybe you might want to be waiting for the vlogs video if it isn't out yet. But I'll try and guide you to the parts which are relevant if need be. Now, before watching this video, I'd first recommend watching the first video. That kind of goes over some of the prerequisites of making YouTube videos and what you need to make sure you have before you actually start doing it. Now, that video has been up for a while, so if you haven't watched it already, I highly recommend it. I'll put it up in a card up here in the top right hand corner for you. Now, if you've already watched that video, then you can just continue watching this one. If you're interested in vlogs, again, I will have another video out on that specifically. I'll put it also up in the card. If it isn't out yet, then there will be a card up there once it is out, and the video will be out very soon if it isn't out already. I'm also going to leave some timestamps down in the description below for any key parts of this episode, because this video might be quite a bit long because it goes into a lot of detail on different aspects of making gaming content. So any specific parts you are interested in, I'll try and put as much detail as I can into the timestamps as well. Just click on those timestamps and it will just skip to that part of the video for you, and you'll get to know about that specific part as well. But I'll try and make sure that there's timestamps in the key areas of this video for you to know about. Now, before you go on to making gaming videos, there's just a few things that you're going to need, a few prerequisites. And I mentioned this in the first video, where there will be some specific prerequisites you're going to need for the different styles of content you have. Now, the first thing is, quite obviously, you're going to need a game or something to record. Again, this is gaming videos, so the game itself is what you're going to need because you want to make a video with it. And if you're just starting out, then anything you typically have in your Steam library will do just for now, just so you can either test it out, or if you actually want to make a video of it, then that's also fine. You don't necessarily need to be going out to buying a new game straight away. If you haven't got any games at all, then I highly recommend doing so. If you have actually got some games already, then you can just pick and choose one and then just play that for the time being. It's completely fine. I mean, the videos I make are not meant necessarily the newest games on the market themselves. Now, the second thing you're going to need is you're going to need some form of recording software. Now, there's a lot of different ones out there, and a lot of people recommend different things. Some people may recommend you use something like Bandicam or Fraps, which basically does the job for you. The one I personally recommend, however, is OBS, or Open Broadcasting Software. This is 100% free, and if it's too good to be true, don't believe that at all, because I 100% guarantee you it is free. %. Not only is it free, it's also open source, and people have made their own versions of it as well. You probably go and pick and choose some different ones. But one thing I really like about OBS is that it's free. It's actually quite easy to use once you know how to use it. It's a bit complicated to set up, but I will go over that in this video. It's a bit complicated to set up, but once it's set up, it's bloody easy to use. It doesn't require that much at all. It also has so many plugins. It's got such great, powerful plugins that makes recording videos even easier and even better. The quality you get out of videos on that thing is absolutely incredible. And another thing about OBS, which definitely sets it high up in the market, is it's not only used for recording, it can also be used for live streaming. It has live streaming built into it, unlike some software such as Bandicam and Fraps. OBS has everything in one package, 100% free. Pretty much it is the best software I can recommend that anybody uses. Now this particular series, of course, it will be specific to making videos, but I might do a live streaming tutorial in the future, or maybe at the end of the series as well if people want to see it. So if you do want to see that, then just let me know down in the comments below and I'll go over it. The setup is very similar to recording videos anyway, so it's not like you're going to need to do that much difference to it. Again, I'm going to be specifically talking about recording videos in this video or in this series as well. Now, if you're just going to be recording videos, this is pretty much all you need. That's the basics. You need a game or something to record, and you need the software, OBS, for example. But there are a few extra bells and whistles you can use for your setup as well. For example, if you wanted to add a face cam, then you're going to need a webcam of some sort. Any webcam will do, generally speaking. The one I got was from PC World and cost me 20 quid. You don't need to splash out for a webcam at all. As long as it can capture, I would say, a minimum of 1080p, then it should do fine. One thing I would recommend, however, is I would recommend buying a separate one as opposed to using a built-in one. Say if you have a built-in one in your laptop or on your monitor, I'd recommend actually going out and getting a separate one. But even then, some of my earlier videos, they just use a bog standard built-in webcam on a laptop, and it does the job for you as well. I'd recommend actually getting one, but if you don't have one and you actually have one built into your monitor or something, then that will do just fine for the time being. Now, if you plan on making videos on console games, you're also going to need some form of capture card. This is largely going to depend on the consoles that you plan to make videos with. The capture card that I use, it's the AverMedia LGX. It captures up to 1080p 60 frames per second, and it has support for a few different consoles. There is a few other capture cards out there. I've heard of one called the StarTech USB 3.0 capture card, and you can find that on Amazon. It has a variety of legacy inputs as well, which is absolutely fantastic if you ever wanted to make videos on things like, say, the Nintendo GameCube or something, and that would pretty much support everything and anything that you can think of. One thing I would recommend especially is just to look out for some different things. If you want to record PS3 gameplay or above, so anything in current gen, last gen, or the generation before, just at least make sure that your capture card can record in high definition at the very least. 60 frames per second is not required for making videos. It is a good thing to have, but it's not a requirement to do. Again, just kind of look out for different things and see what you like best, and obviously compare the costs as well. The one I bought, at the time I bought it, was about £100. It's currently discontinued, but there is the LGX2, which doesn't have legacy inputs such as the component cable, which does come with my version of it, but it does have the HDMI inputs in it, and it would work exactly the same way, 1080p 60 frames a second. As far as software and hardware goes, though, that's about it for the basics, but there are other things that you can get to enhance your setup further as well. I won't go into detail about them in this video, but I might talk about them at the end of the series or something, or in another video about some extra things that you could get to flush out your setup a little bit more. Now, as I mentioned in the previous video, you're also going to need a decent PC which is capable of both playing and recording videos at the same time. In this respect, it's important not to cheap out on the core components, because recording is very resource intensive. It is very resource intensive, and you can definitely max out some components if you don't go for the right things. You will be using a lot of CPU power in particular when recording videos, and also GPU power, and both of those kind of work together for the encoding bit to ensure that you have a stable video, or to ensure that you've got stability in your recording. You're also going to need some modest supply of RAM, but you've also got to remember that you're going to be playing the game at the same time as you're recording it. So you've also got to make sure that you don't cheap out, so that the resources are shared between the two, and recording is very resource intensive, as well as gaming being quite resource intensive too. As far as PC hardware goes, I'm not going to recommend anything specific for two reasons. One, I'm not affiliated by any brand in particular, so I have no obligation to do so. Two, PC hardware is often down to personal preference. Whether you go for Intel or AMD is completely up to you. I will also talk about my own specs just to give you some idea of the hardware you'll probably need as well. But when it comes to specifics, I'd recommend doing your own research. Minor content warning, this part will be quite technical, but I'll try to keep things as easy to understand as possible. So first of all, the processor. This is pretty much the brain of the computer. This is what makes it work. This is what makes it do things that it does, I guess. This is a very important component to not cheap out on. And what I mean is don't stick an Intel Pentium into your gaming rig. That's not going to work ever. My PC has an Intel Core i7-8700 inside, and it's pretty much the most powerful CPU of that generation of Intel processors you can get. On the Intel side, I'd recommend going for at least the Core i5. And also don't go below the 7th generation. So if you're looking at the Intel side of things, Intel i5, i7, 7th generation and above will do you just fine. I'd say go for the 8th generation personally, only because from the 8th generation onwards things did start to improve a little bit. If you can, I'd certainly recommend going for the 9th or the 10th generation, but certainly don't go below the 7th generation of Intel CPUs if you can. On AMD's side of things, and I do apologise, I'm not too knowledgeable on the AMD side of things only because I don't normally go for their processors, but I would say, from doing research and from knowing quite a bit about the computer components themselves, is make sure it's at least in the Ryzen family of products. From doing research though, I would say at least a Ryzen 5. It kind of follows the same numbering scheme as the Intel stuff, the i3, i5, i7. You've got the Ryzen 3, the Ryzen 5 and Ryzen 7. I would say go for at least the Ryzen 5 personally, and I think that would do the trick in any generation as of right now. Someone who knows the AMD side of things will know more than I do about that, so definitely look for more information about that before taking my word on it. Someone in the comments below will probably have some more information as well, so feel free to share your thoughts as well in the comments below, but please don't criticize other people's decisions. Like my decision to use Intel, please don't criticize that. Just if you have more knowledge about the AMD side than I do, then just share it down below without using too much criticism. Now for the graphics card, it's important not to cheap out on these two because it's pretty much a requirement for playing games these days. I would definitely recommend going for a standalone graphics card, especially for recording videos. That is pretty much a requirement for recording videos, that you have a standalone graphics card. I would say the integrated graphics, especially on things like the Intel platform, will not suffice for playing a lot of games, and you'll not be able to benefit from the recording either if you use GPU encoding. In my PC, I've got an NVIDIA GTX 1060 6GB card, and that is what I would consider to be the minimum for most games today. I would definitely say don't go below the 9th generation if you're going for NVIDIA. If you can splash some juicy cash, then you can always go for the 20 series RTX cards. They are a great investment to make if you can. I've heard a lot of great things about the NVIDIA side of things, so if you can, then certainly splash out on one of them. 10th generation, I would say, is definitely a good baseline to go for, but certainly don't go below the 9th generation. It's not worth it at all. AMD also has a selection of graphics cards that you can choose from, a bit like their CPUs. I'm not big into the AMD family of products, so I've never actually used an AMD graphics card apart from in my MacBook, but I can't really put my two pennies on these, though I would say anything from about the RX 500 onwards up until about the Vega 64 will do you okay for AMD, I would say. I think those would be quite well for you to actually record some videos. But I know AMD's graphics cards are starting to improve quite a bit, actually, just a bit like their CPUs. But again, anything from the RX 500 onwards should do just fine. Now, if you can't afford a great GPU right now, like if you can't splash out for the RTX 2080 or something, then don't fear too much. The graphics cards, they're easily upgradable. You can always exchange a graphics card inside your computer to something different later on down the line. It's a lot easier to upgrade your graphics card than it is your processor anyway. So if there's anywhere that you would want to cheap out on, it would be the graphics card more than the processor. Ideally try not to cheap out on either of them, but the graphics card probably more than the processor. But you could always go for something, say, like the 1060, like I've got, the GTX 1060 like I've got in my computer, and then go for, say, a 1080 or a 2080 card later on down the line. For RAM, there's no real brand to look out for. I think Corsair seems to have a good share of the market at the moment. The most important thing when it comes to RAM is how much RAM you've got and what speed it runs at. You don't necessarily need to be looking out for brands unless you're actually looking for something that's compatible with your own motherboard. Generally speaking, most RAM will work quite well, but again, just make sure to check that just in case. Like my PC, it has 16GB of sweet memory inside of it, and it runs at a clock speed of about 3000 MHz, which is really, really good. So it's quite fast, and there's a lot of it. And that's kind of what you're looking for. And I would say 16 gigabytes is definitely a good minimum to look out for when it comes to memory. Especially when you consider things like gaming and recording at the same time. If you're thinking of doing other types of content, say if you're looking at just doing tutorials of something, then maybe you can kind of go down to maybe the 8 gigabyte range thereabouts. But I would say for most cases 16 gigabytes will do you quite well. You can splurge for more RAM, but it's not really required. I would say 16 gigabytes are pretty much the minimum and the maximum that you can think of. Maybe 32 gigabytes if you really want to, but I wouldn't say it's worth it going for much more than that unless you're really doing some very resource intensive tasks which would benefit from it. Other PC components are largely down to personal preference, and I'm not going to go into detail about them because they're not really important. They don't really make much of a difference. So for example, the power supply, as long as you've got enough power, you're okay. Whether or not you want a disk drive these days, it's really up to you. What I would say though is storage-wise, and I would say you need to make sure you have plenty of space to record some footage at the very least. If you're like me, you'll probably be recording multiple videos at a time. That means you'll need space for them all to be recorded and then later edited. I'd also highly recommend investing in a portable hard drive. Do not get a memory stick. Just don't. They will not have enough space for everything that you want to put on there. I would say a portable hard drive will definitely do much better because you can put a lot more storage on them. The one that I've got, it was pretty much a godsend at the time, especially when my laptop corrupted at the time, if anybody actually remembers that. And I had all my videos backed up so I could still edit and upload my content as normal. I just couldn't record. But that's pretty much it as far as the actual requirements go for recording gaming videos. For more tips about PC hardware and stuff like that, I'd highly recommend checking out channels that are dedicated to them. One of my favourite actually is Linus Tech Tips. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but if not, then I'll put a link down in the description below. They do things like comparing PC hardware and stuff like that to different types. So they do a lot of comparisons between Intel and AMD, and they do a lot of comparisons between Nvidia and AMD and integrated graphics and stuff like that. So if you ever want to check those out, I definitely highly recommend checking Linus Tech Tips out because he does fantastic videos. He has a team of people who do fantastic videos and they're absolutely fantastic. Very good quality videos and I highly recommend checking them out. But I'll put a link down in the description below for anybody who does want to go and check them out. Now you have the software and the hardware that you're going to need. It's now time to fire up that recording software that you've chosen to go with and let's get started setting it all up. For this video I'm going to be talking specifically about OBS, as it can be quite confusing to actually set up. It was for me when I started. If you're using OBS like I've recommended, then definitely highly recommend watching this part. And I'll go into the significant detail of how to set up OBS for your own need. First things first, when you open OBS, you'll be presented to a completely blank canvas. There'll be nothing there. But before you do anything, you're going to need to configure the settings themselves. To do this, on the top of the screen, go to File and then to Settings, and this will open up a new dialog for all the settings that OBS goes through. There are three very important tabs on the left hand side that you're going to need to know. These three are the Output, the Audio and the Video tabs, and those are the ones I'm going to be specifically talking about in this video because they are the most important. The other ones, they're not really that important. There's a few things in the Advanced tab that I'm going to go over, but there's not much more than that really. Now the first tab we're going to go into therefore is the Output tab, and this is where a lot of detail is going to be going into because this is the most confusing setup for the entirety of OBS, trust me. First of all, you need to make sure the output mode is set to Advanced. It may make it sound complicated, but trust me, it's actually easier than the simple method to set everything up properly. Now, in the Output tab as well, next thing you're going to want to click on is the Recording tab. We're going to skip the Streaming tab because that's specifically for live streaming, so the Recording tab is where you want to start. First things first, you want to make sure that the type is set to Standard and you're pretty much okay to start off. If it's on anything else, just switch it to Standard. And then the recording path, this is what you're going to be wanting to change quite a bit often, depending on what you're doing. This is where your file is going to be saved to. So if you're, say now if I was recording a Ratchet & Clank 2 video, I have a specific folder for Ratchet & Clank 2 so that they're separate, and then I have another one for say the Beast Inside so that they're separate from each other. It's up to you how you want to set this up, but if you want to, you might be wanting to change this a few times, so just remember, if you want to change it, go back to the settings and then it's the Output folder. This is where all your videos will be saved then. I would also recommend keeping the generate file names without spaces unchecked though. Now for some complicated stuff. The recording format. I personally use MKV. to record. But you can also use MP4 if you want to. I would, however, steer away from any of the other formats, and God forbid do not use FLV. The main difference really between recording an MKV and MP4 is if, say, OBS crashed in the middle of a recording, MP4 files can corrupt very easily, and if they're corrupted, you lose them forever. With MKV, this doesn't happen. OBS can still crash, and if it does, then your files are safe, or at least safer. They don't corrupt quite as easily. The only thing I would say with MKV though is you'll have an added step of actually remuxing the video after it's finished, but this process is very easy and doesn't require any additional software, so don't worry about that. MKV to MP4 requires no extra software at all. As for FLV, besides the fact that Flash video is outdated and pretty much obsolete, it doesn't support multi-channel audio. And multi-channel audio is pretty much paramount to making videos, I would say. It's how I actually make my videos myself. I'll go into that process in a moment. As for all the other file types, I just don't know enough about them, and MP4 is pretty much the standard for every media streaming service. YouTube even recommends that you upload your videos in MP4 because they're just easier to embed on the internet and stuff like that. So MP4 is pretty much the standard. And every media streaming site will use it, and every editing software knows how to use it as well. So I'd recommend recording an MKV, which you can then remux into MP4, ready for editing and uploading. As I've mentioned previously, I highly recommend the multi-channel audio recording settings as well. You can really have as many as you want, but I would only recommend having 2, so you can separate things like the microphone away from everything else. So you can always separate then the microphone and the game audio very easily. You can edit them away from each other, so the microphone and the game audio can be edited independently. So it definitely makes sense to record in multi-channel audio. Now, the encoder option is a little bit down to user preference, but also partly down to whether you want to use hardware or software encoding. It also depends on what's actually available. If you have an NVIDIA graphics card, you'll have the NVENC option, like I have, and I don't know what the AMD alternative is, but I'd wager a guess that the settings later are going to be very similar. You'll also have something called X264. Now, every single one of these actually records into H.264, which is pretty much the video standard for MP4 video. In the encoder setting, you may also have a lossless encoder option. Personally, I would steer clear of the lossless encoder entirely. Lossless just means that the recording is pretty much uncompressed, but the downside of this is the file sizes are going to be massive. A single recording could be in the range of about 10 to 20 gigabytes depending on the length and what's actually happening in the video, and the quality really won't be much more different than using the compressed encoders in most cases. As for the other encoders, this is where you have a little bit of choice. You've got the choice between using software encoding or hardware encoding, and this is going to be a little bit complicated to explain and understand, but bear with me please. X264 is the software encoder, and this will rely heavily on your processor, on your CPU. If you have a powerful processor, this isn't going to be too much of an issue, but don't be surprised if you see your CPU usage in OBS reach high percentages. The NVENC encoder, or whatever the AMD equivalent is, they're hardware encoders, and they'll rely heavily on a graphics card. So basically, the software encoder relies heavily on the CPU, the hardware encoders rely heavily on the graphics card. There's benefits and drawbacks to both options, but what you use is completely up to you and is generally down to personal preference. Whether you want to use more processor power in videos or GPU powers, it doesn't really make a difference. Now, regardless of the options that you choose, the encoder settings are going to be very important to actually modify, especially the rate control. When recording videos, never use constant bitrate, right? Never use a CBR option. It doesn't adapt well to fast movements, and trying to estimate the required bitrate needed will never work. Trust me, I have tried. I've linked the video below by Tom Scott which talks about video bitrates in more depth for anyone who would like to have a look at why bitrate is important as well, so if you want to have a look at that, then I'll put a link down in the description for you as well. The variable bitrate option, or VBR, isn't much better either because it still has a bitrate limit, but the bitrate will vary depending on what happens in the video. So if there's not much going on, then the bitrate will come down automatically and then it'll go up again. But if you've got that limit, then it won't go above that. So again, I would say steer clear from anything which says bitrate in this case. Now my recommendation, and this is the one that I use, is called Constant Quantization Parameter, or it's abbreviated as CQP. And this is if you're using the hardware encoder, because I use hardware encoding, I use a CQP option. Or you can also use constant rate factor CRF if you're using the software encoding. Now what these options do essentially is, in basic terms, it will keep the quality of the video constant throughout the video, but it would automatically adjust the bitrate accordingly, which is a much better option to use regardless. They're also very good at keeping the file sizes relatively low. I know this from experience, so instead of a video being 20 gigabytes at lossless or like 5 megabytes at using constant bitrate, they're about 2 gigabytes of file per file for about 15 to 20 minute video, which is much easier to manage. Now, provided that you've either chosen CQP or CRF, the next option you have is either going to be called CQ level or CRF. Both of these effectively mean exactly the same thing. And on my videos I have this set to 18, and this works quite well for me. It keeps the quality quite good for 1080p content, and it keeps the file sizes smaller and easy to manage. As I've said, it's about 2 or 3 gigabytes of file for a 15 to 20 minute video. If you're making 1080p content, which I would certainly recommend, I would then recommend anything in that box to be between 14 and 19. One thing to take into consideration here is the smaller the number, the better the quality, but the larger the file size, and vice versa. Now, finding a good balance can be done quite easy through trial and error. 18 works really well for me, so again, if you want to go for exactly the same settings that I've gone for, 18 works really well. Below a certain point, it doesn't really make a difference. I mean, if you go down to 0 or 1, then you're going to have a lossless video, but it won't really make a difference. After a certain point, it really doesn't make a difference. So the next option is the keyframe interval, and thankfully this is exactly the same on both the hardware and the software encoding, which makes it much easier for me to explain what it does. What this actually means is how often does a keyframe get sent to the encoder. Now I have this set to 2 seconds, which means that every 2 seconds a full frame is loaded back in. Basically, in video, when a frame is loaded, the next frame is only what changed between the 2 frames. Now if you don't know anything about video is made up of frames, and every frame is basically an image that just goes past your screen. This is how video works in every manner. This video, for example, is 50 frames per second, so every single second you've seen 50 images fly past your screen. What the keyframe interval does, basically, is every 2 seconds it will load in the full frame again. And then what happens for the remainder between the 2 seconds is the frame is loaded in based on what changed in the last video. It's very complicated to explain and very complicated to understand. Just know that effectively every 2 seconds a frame is loaded back in. And this process basically just repeats itself into however lengthy interval you've put into it. 2 seconds is a pretty good place for it in my opinion. You don't normally need to go lower than that, as long as you don't set it to 0 or auto, because 0 will set it automatically to auto. You'll be okay. The next 2 options you've got then are the preset and the profile, and these are all to do with the H.264 encoder. These will differ slightly between the CPU and GPU encoding, but ultimately they do exactly the same thing. They don't really make the quality any better or worse, but they'll impact how hard your CPU or GPU needs to work. The harder they work, it can have the benefit of a smaller file size, but it will severely impact performance. For GPU encoding, I would recommend this to be on the performance option, and for the CPU encoding, I'd recommend it being on very fast, which will give you a good balance between the performance and file size. As for the profile option, I'm not really sure what it does, but a good idea is to set it to main, because that's just what I have it set to, and I don't really know exactly what it does, to be fair. The other options can pretty much be left as default. Now, with all that done on the recording side of things, we can now move to the audio tab within the output. Make sure that you're still on the output tab and the audio tab in the output. Don't switch to the audio tab just yet on the left-hand side, because we've not reached it just yet. Now, depending on how many audio tracks you've selected before, you'll now have to tweak the bitrate of each one. You can probably just switch them all if you want. It's up to you what you do with this. Depending on how many tracks you've chosen, it's not going to make much of a difference, but I'd recommend just sticking to the ones that you've chosen just for simplicity. A bitrate of 256 kilobits per second will probably do quite well for audio as far as things are considered, especially for recording video. Bearing in mind it will be, again, compressed later on in editing. You can also label them, as I've done here, to clearly identify which audio track is the microphone and which is the desktop audio, so it's always good because I think it actually labels them then in Audacity, which we'll be using for the editing video later in the series. Now we can move to the audio settings. So on the left bar, you can now click on audio in that area. Now the 2 main settings we're going to need to change here are the general and the devices. Everything else can be left default. In general, you're going to need to set the sample rate. I recommend putting it to 48 kHz as it will result in higher quality, and as we're dealing with audio and video, it's important to find a good balance between the two, because as I mentioned before, good audio is just as important as good video. Under devices, I'm pretty sure this is probably self-explanatory, but I'll explain it anyway. All you need to do is select the devices you're going to be recording audio with. OBS automatically chooses the default audio devices, but I'd recommend changing them to what you actually use just to keep things a bit easy to manage later on. For example, I've set my desktop audio to my headphones, which I use as my speakers essentially, and my microphone audio goes to the line in, which is from my microphone. So for this microphone I use the line in. Every other device can be kept as disabled, and all other options on this page can be kept as they are, as the default values. If you have multiple microphones that you want to use, then you can also select them here. That's a really good thing about OBS, is that it not only has support for multi-channel recording, it also has multi-device capabilities as well, which is really, really good. Next is the video tab in the settings, and the first two options are all to do with the resolution, but they have slightly different definitions. The base resolution is the resolution of the OBS scene, so the black area in the OBS scene itself, that is the base or the canvas of OBS, and that's what the base resolution will control. The output resolution is the resolution of the file that's created when you recorded it, and in most cases you want to keep these the same. So if you've got 1080p in the base resolution, you'll want 1080p in the output as well. Whatever happens, do not put a higher output than the base, because that'll just give you grainy video and you don't want that. You may want to sometimes go a lower output than the resolution, especially when you're doing things like, say, live streaming, but in most cases you just want to keep them the same. For the resolutions themselves, you've probably heard terms like 720p and 1080p and so on. This is determined effectively by the resolution of the video. For 1080p video, for example, your resolution needs to be 1920 by 1080. For 720p, you'll need to set to 1280 by 720. I wouldn't recommend going below 720p if making YouTube videos at all, as the resolution gets funky and the quality will decrease substantially. If possible, I would, especially in gaming, I'd recommend at least 1080p. For frame rate, you have a few options here. Firstly, I'd recommend switching the drop down to integer FPS value. This will allow you to enter your own FPS value, which I do recommend. Secondly, the FPS you choose is largely up to you and depends on the video you're trying to make and the power you have to play with. Most of my videos are recorded in 1080p 60 frames per second, so the value in that box is 60. Regardless of what you choose, I'd say don't go below 24 frames per second, and I would even recommend not going below 30 frames per second to avoid choppy video. 30 frames per second I would say is probably the minimum you want for YouTube videos in most cases. Finally, in the settings you have the advanced tab. This is where there only needs to be some minor changes under the video tab here. The renderer I would say should be set to DirectX 11. Basically this uses the DirectX renderer on your computer. And the colour format should be NV12, colour space 601. Colour range should be partial, and once those are all done, just click apply and then OK, and you're done with the setup. A restart of OBS is probably recommended now as well, just to apply all the changes, but I don't think it's needed. I would just recommend it. Now you have all the settings done. All the settings are done, you never have to see them again. Wonderful. Best thing ever about OBS. You never have to see the settings ever again. We can now start adding things to the scene. In OBS, everything has to be added manually. That's the only thing about OBS compared to other video recording software, is that everything would have to be added in manually. But the possibilities, they are practically endless. You can literally do anything, you can place anything anywhere you want, and you can do anything you want with it. Before you add anything though, I would make sure your game is running before trying to add it to the scene. So make sure that your game is running, or whatever you want to record is running, or you could just practice this by using the desktop capture if you want to as well, just to make sure that everything works first before you actually go into it. First of all, I'm going to talk about the PC game. I will make a small section about the console game as well later on, but if you're playing a PC game, you're going to need to add a game capture. And to do this, you want to right click in the sources box, mouse over add, then select game capture. A dialog will appear for you to select the game. Again, first of all, make sure that your game is actually running in the background or something. Make sure the mode is set to capture specific window, and then you can select the game from the window drop down. Now, this may not work all the time. OBS can be a bit funky sometimes to just refuse to capture your game at all, and it can be a bit of trial and error to get working sometimes. If it doesn't work, a good thing to check is if you can run your game in a borderless window. You can find this option in the graphic settings, so where it would actually say full screen, you can also choose a borderless window option as opposed to just a windowed option and full screen option. You have those options, sometimes there's a third borderless window option. If you have that option available, I'd highly recommend using it because there's actually a lot of performance benefits from it as well. What this actually does though is it just runs the game effectively in a window by itself, but it's like a borderless window, so you don't have the borders or anything in it. It looks full screen, but it isn't, basically. If the borderless window option is available and you can't get the game capture to work at all, you can then use a window capture, and you just follow the exact same steps as above. Capture a specific window, choose the window from the drop-down menu, and if borderless window isn't available, a third option you can try is a display capture. This isn't ideal as everything on the display will then be captured in the video, so I would only use it as a last resort, but it can work for some full screen games. Again, OBS can be quite funky, sometimes it just refuse to work at all, but if that does happen, then give me a shout and I try and troubleshoot things, because most of the time a display capture will work. If it doesn't, then just give me a shout. The rest of the settings then can be pretty much kept as default. You may want to change the capture cursor option depending on what you're actually doing. All that setting does is it will either show your PC's cursor in the video or it won't, depending on if it's checked or not. If you have a webcam in your scene, you'll need to now add a video capture device source. In this dialog, under device, you'll need to then select the webcam itself. The name may differ to mine depending on what webcam you use, but the rest of the settings will pretty much be exactly the same. First things first, I would recommend checking the deactivate when not showing box. So what this will do is when you move away from the scene, it will then deactivate the device. It kind of gives you a better performance advantage in a sense if you're using a scene which doesn't have a webcam, for example. If you have other scenes with webcam footage as well with different settings, then this setting will prevent them from interfering, as you can only use the webcam in one scene at a time. So say now if you wanted a 4x3 webcam in the corner for your gaming videos, and then you want another scene with a full screen webcam, this will then not interfere with the other scene. Next, you want to change resolution FPS type to custom. Again, I would not recommend going for device default because you can't change it, but I'd recommend changing it to custom so you can actually change things. Now, I'd recommend a resolution of a 4x3 aspect ratio if you're doing a gaming video. This just means that it takes up less space in the corner, wherever it is, and it'll focus more on you then. If, like me, you have a 1080p webcam, you'll have a lot of different choices here. Now, I'd recommend a 720p 4x3 resolution, and for this, it is 960 by 720. If you only have a 720p webcam, then you'll need 640 by 480 if the option is there. I wouldn't recommend going below that or your webcam footage will look awful, and again, as the video is basically about good quality, you want to make sure you have the best quality you can get. Under FPS, you should then select the Match Output FPS option. The rest of the settings can then be left as default. Now, if you have a capture card and you want to do console gaming, you're going to want to follow exactly the same process as the webcam pretty much. So you want to add a video capture device. Most of these settings will be pretty much the same, but as I use an AVerMedia LGX card for console videos, I'll be going over these settings specifically. So you want to make sure that you know the settings for your own capture card above the one that I use, basically. Now, I'm going to assume that you've already installed the drivers for your capture card and that you have it set up, but you just need to add it into OBS. And you can do this pretty well. The software that often comes with capture cards is not fit for purpose, I would say. OBS does the job perfectly. It will capture pretty much any capture card device that you have. As we did with the webcam, you want to make sure to select the device. Now, under device, you're going to need to select the capture card itself. For mine, it's the AVerMedia GC550 video capture, which is basically the AVerMedia LGX. It just takes the name of the driver itself. You pretty much follow exactly the same settings as with the webcam, but you will need to tweak the resolution depending on the console you're using in most cases. Some consoles will only output certain resolutions and will only allow capture in those resolutions as well, but in OBS you can always stretch things out if you wanted to as well. It's completely up to you. That's how I get my Ratchet & Clank 2 footage to appear in 1080p. Again, this is a case of trial and error as well as to whether or not it works, so I just recommend trying as much as you can and seeing if you can get things out of it. Under FPS, in this one, you again want to match the output FPS or just go for the highest FPS that you can get. I'd also recommend changing the audio output mode to output desktop audio wave out. I've had issues in the past with audio not capturing properly with the capture card, and this can ruin videos completely, so I find this to be a viable alternative. Basically what that will do is the audio will come through your desktop speakers as opposed to through the capture card itself. And it also makes the monitoring the audio a bit easier as well, as you can hear it through your headphones or speakers, depending on which output device you selected previously. In some cases you may also need to go into the configure video option here as well. If you use an AverMedia LGX like I do, you'll definitely need to do this, as you will need to change the input between HDMI and component depending on what you're capturing. So if you're capturing a PlayStation 2 or a PlayStation 3, you're going to need the component input. If you're capturing a PlayStation 4, you're going to need the HDMI input. A lot of the other settings in here you can pretty much leave as default as well. And after all of that, we're almost done. Finally, thankfully. And the only thing we have left to do is sort out the audio output, and this is the very last thing we have to do. Under Audio Mixer, click one of the settings cogs and go to Advanced Audio Output. First off, you want to make sure your mic or auxiliary is set to mono. That will just help with balancing the audio later and prevent any issues with it, which may cause the audio to be only heard in one ear. For example, you may have heard of comments where people say, "My left ear enjoyed this video." Well, that's because in most cases the microphone, which is only being output through one ear, and if it's stereo mode, what it does is it has the two channels left and right. In mono it just has the one, which basically does the two, and it keeps things equal. And most microphones output mono anyway, so you probably won't need to tweak this at all, but again, it's better to have it mono just to alleviate any issues later on. Next, you want to go to the tracks on the right. By default, you'll notice all the checkboxes here are ticked. Basically, that just keeps things simple, so that if you don't want to have the extra channels or anything like that, then OBS has it all set up as default. Now the first thing that you want to do is untick all the tracks for the webcam. The webcam you do not want to be outputting audio for at all. The next ones are dependent on how many audio tracks you've selected previously. If you have 2 tracks like I use, you only need to have the checked boxes under 1 and 2. So you can untick the rest. So channels 3, 4, 5 and 6, and if there's any more after that as well, untick every single one of them as well. Then you want to separate the microphone and the desktop audio completely. So I'd recommend putting the mic auxiliary in track 1 and the desktop audio in track 2. What this will do is it will split the audio between the 2 tracks. Only the microphone audio will be captured into track 1 and only the desktop audio will then be captured into track 2. You now have everything done. Hooray! Finally, and you're finally ready to start recording a video. We've all come down to this moment. All you have to do to record your video is to click the start recording button and you're ready to go. And by going back to the OBS settings, you can also set hotkeys to do this, meaning that you can record easily without having to tab out of your game, for example. Like I have the start and stop recording set to F10 on my keyboard, so I can just press F10 anywhere and it will start recording every time. Now go ahead, record your own video, and there's one more thing to go over afterwards. So when you finish recording your video, come back to this video and then we'll carry on. Okay, so you've now finished your video. Finally, you've finished the video, it's all done, finished. It's stored in your hard drive and you're pretty much ready to edit the video. But wait, depending on how you recorded your video, there's one more step left in the recording process. Remember back to the settings I mentioned about recording to the MKV format as opposed to MP4. Well, if you've done this, which I do actually recommend, you need to remux it for editing purposes. Now this is a very easy process, so it won't take too long at all. To remux a recording, all you have to do is go to the file, then Remux Recordings. That's it. It's very easy. A dialog box will come up here, and if you click the 3 dots on the OBS recording, a file selector dialog will appear for you to select your videos. This should automatically go to the folder where you actually recorded a video as well, so it's very, very simple. All you have to do here is select all the videos you've just recorded. If you've done multiple videos, you can drag all the videos and then click on the open. Or if you've only done the one video, then you can just select that video and click open as well. This will then list them all in the remuxing dialog, in which you can then just click remux, and OBS will go through the process of remuxing all the videos into MP4 ready for editing. This can take a while depending on how many videos you have or the length of the videos being remuxed, but you can just let OBS do its thing. Go get yourself a pan ad and be back in about 10 minutes or so, and it should be finished. That's what I do normally anyway. You don't need to intervene this process, and OBS will show a dialog when the process is finished as well. You don't have to do anything, OBS does it all itself. And there we go. The recording process for your gaming videos is now complete. If you have set everything up already to your liking, You'll also never have to worry about it again. Basically, next time you're recording a video, just open up OBS and you can just start recording straight away. All your settings will be saved as well as all your sources and everything else. Everything will be saved in OBS. All you have to do is record your videos, and once they're complete, remux them. That's it. It's very simple. Now, I've gone into an incredible amount of depth in this video because I want to give all the information that I can about recording videos, especially using an incredibly powerful but complicated tool like OBS. I do, however, hope this has been very valuable to many people, and that those of you watching who are just starting out will benefit from this knowledge of the software. If there's anything extra that anyone would like to know about OBS, then please feel free to make a suggestion in a comment below, and I might make a video about it at the end of the series as well. I might collate them into one video about OBS specifically at the end of the series. Likewise, I really hope everyone enjoyed the video and that it was informative, and if so, don't forget to like the video, comment down below, and subscribe to the channel. It'll help me out a lot and you'll get more videos like this. Also, don't forget to like my Facebook page on Twitter and on Twitch. And as always, I'll see you all in the next video, which will hopefully be the vlogs video, which I'll be uploading soon. But until then, goodbye.